You're not serious." Noelle's voice cracked on the last word, the phone pressed so hard against her ear that her knuckles had gone white. "Tell me you're not serious, Grant." "It's done, Noelle. I already filed. My attorney will send your copy Monday. After 11 years, after everything I gave up for you, that's the problem. You gave things up. Winners don't give things up. They take. And I found someone who takes." The line went dead. Noelle Whitfield stood in the hallway of their brownstone. His brownstone, she would learn soon enough. Holding the phone like a woman holding a grenade after the pin has already been pulled. In the living room behind her, Chloe, 6, was singing to herself while arranging stuffed animals in order of height. Marcus, 8, was reading a comic book upside down just to see if the story still made sense. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday evening. She set the phone down on the hall table very carefully, as though it might shatter, walked into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and pressed a towel against her face until the shaking stopped. Then she went back out and asked who wanted macaroni for dinner. Please, before we go further, if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything and helps us bring you more heartfelt stories like this one. Thank you. Now let's continue. To understand what Grant Whitfield did to Noelle, you need to understand how thoroughly he had dismantled her before he left. They met when she was 25. She was finishing her master's in education, 2 semesters from a career she had dreamed about since she was 14 years old, sitting in a classroom in Baton Rouge and realizing that the teacher at the front of the room was the most powerful person she had ever seen. Not powerful like money, powerful like light, the kind of person who could change the weather in a room just by caring. Grant was 32, already a partner-track attorney at a mid-size firm in Philadelphia, charming in that particular way that looks like generosity but is actually control. He opened doors, chose restaurants, selected wines, decided vacations, and somewhere in the choreography of all that deciding, Noelle stopped deciding for herself. It happened the way a single storm but with 10,000 ordinary rains. First, it was the suggestion that she could finish her degree later, once the children were older. Then it was the implication that her part-time tutoring made her look desperate. Then it was the long, punishing silences whenever she mentioned going back to work, as though ambition in a wife was a character flaw he was too polite to name. Her wardrobe shrank, her friendships thinned, her world contracted to the radius of his approval. She cooked what he preferred, wore what he commented on favorably, laughed at what he found funny. She became fluent in a language she never chose to learn, the language of making yourself smaller so someone else can feel large. Grant's affair with Meredith Payne had been going on for 19 months before Noelle found out. She hadn't been looking. She had simply walked into his home office to leave a coffee on his desk and seen the laptop screen still open, a thread of messages so explicit and so casual that they could only belong to 2 people who had long ago stopped being careful. Meredith Payne. Noelle had met her once, at a firm gala, tall, angular, the kind of woman who wore confidence like armor and ambition like perfume. A junior partner at a competing firm. Everything Grant had systematically trained Noelle not to be. The divorce was surgical. Grant's colleagues handled it. Noelle's court-appointed attorney was competent but outmatched. She left with the minimum the state required him to provide. Child support that covered the basics and not 1 cent more. No alimony. Grant's team had argued, successfully, that Noelle was voluntarily unemployed and capable of supporting herself. Capable. The word sat in her chest like a stone. She had been capable once. He had spent 11 years making sure she forgot it. She moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where the streetlights buzzed and the elevator worked every other Thursday. Marcus took the smaller room without being asked. Chloe slept with 3 stuffed animals and a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, and every night for the first month, she asked the same question: "Is Daddy coming to say goodnight?" Every night for the first month, Noelle found a different, gentle way to say no. The crying happened after they were asleep, always after. She sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator and let it come. Not self-pity. Something rawer than that. The grief of a woman realizing she had spent a decade building a life inside someone else's approval, and now that the approval was gone, She had to find out if there was anything left underneath. There was. The first year was brutal and beautiful in equal measure. She took a job at a community learning center, minimum wage, organizing after-school programs for children who had nowhere else to go. The pay was humiliating. The work was not. She watched a 14-year-old boy, who hadn't spoken in class for 2 years, read a poem aloud to a room of strangers, and she understood, in a way that rattled her bones, that this was what she had been born to do. She went back to school. Online courses late at night, laptop balanced on her knees, while the apartment creaked and settled around her. She finished her teaching certification in 11 months. Then she kept going. She began writing. Short essays at first, posted on a free blog nobody read. Honest, raw pieces about parenting through upheaval, about explaining divorce to a 6-year-old, about the particular loneliness of standing in a grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon, choosing between the organic apples your daughter loves and the electricity bill. The writing found people the way water finds cracks. Within 6 months, her blog, The Honest Table, had 40,000 readers. Within a year, it had 250,000. She wrote about the things other parents were thinking but too afraid to say. About failing and trying again. About raising children in the space between what you can afford and what they deserve. A literary agent emailed her, then a publisher. Her first book, Set the Table Anyway, debuted at number 14 on the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed for 9 weeks. Corporate speaking engagements followed. School districts hired her to train teachers. A national parenting magazine asked her to write a monthly column. She was not rich, not yet, but she was building something that had her name on it, and nobody else's, and it felt like breathing after holding her breath for 11 years. She was enough. She had always been enough. She had simply married a man who needed her not to know it. And then, on a morning in late September, 26 months after the divorce, a courier arrived at her door with a cream-colored envelope. Heavy cardstock, embossed gold lettering, the kind of stationery that announces itself before you open it. Grant Whitfield and Meredith Payne request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Below the printed text, in Grant's handwriting, that same tight, deliberate script she had read on birthday cards and legal threats, a note, bring the kids if you want. Let them see what their father's life looks like when he's with the right woman. Noelle read it twice, set it on the counter, poured a glass of water, drank it slowly. Then she picked up the invitation again and looked at it the way a chess player looks at a board after the opponent has made a catastrophic mistake without realizing it. Oh, Grant, she said softly to the empty kitchen. You really shouldn't have. His name was Elliot Crane. He didn't arrive like the men in stories. There was no dramatic entrance, no eyes meeting across a crowded room. He sent a professional email with proper punctuation and no exclamation marks, introducing himself as the founder of Bridgepoint Learning, asking if she would consider a partnership. Noelle Googled him before she replied. What she found made her close the laptop and open it again, just to make sure. Bridgepoint Learning was one of the most respected education technology companies in the world, operating in 31 countries, partnered with UNICEF and 3 major university systems, valued at a figure that made her blink. Elliot Crane appeared on Forbes philanthropy lists, but almost never in photographs. The few she found showed a man who looked like he'd rather be reading than being photographed. Dark hair, quiet eyes, the posture of someone who listens before he speaks. She expected arrogance, the particular brand of it that successful men carry like an accessory, the assumption that their time is worth more than yours, their opinion more informed, their handshake a gift. Elliot was the opposite of that. Their first call lasted 53 minutes. He asked her about her methodology, her philosophy, the specific piece she had written about teaching children to name their emotions. He quoted a paragraph from memory, not to impress her. She could tell the difference, but because it had genuinely stayed with him. You write like someone who's lived it, he said. Most education experts write like they've studied it. There's a difference that matters. She was quiet for a moment. I have lived it. I know, he said simply. When they met in person 3 weeks later, her choice Noelle braced for the shift that always came when powerful, men stepped out from behind their screens. The larger presence, the subtle dominance, the way they filled a space. Elliot arrived 7 minutes early, chose the smaller chair, and ordered a black coffee. He stood when she walked in, shook her hand firmly, sat back down, and said, "I read your chapter on shame-based discipline 3 times. I think you're going to change how an entire generation talks to their children." Nobody had ever said anything like that to her. Nobody who mattered. The partnership was signed within a month. The Honest Tables curriculum would be integrated into Bridgepoint's global platform. Noelle's work would reach schools in countries she had never visited. She told herself it was professional. She told herself the reason she thought about him on Tuesday mornings and Thursday evenings, and most of the time in between, was because the work was exciting. She told herself the way his voice softened when he said her name was simply how he talked. She was not convincing anyone, least of all herself. 3 weeks before Grant's wedding, Elliot came to Philadelphia to finalize the partnership details. They worked late at her apartment, papers spread across the kitchen table, laptops open, coffee going cold, and when they were done, he noticed the invitation on the counter where she had left it, face up like a dare she was preparing herself to accept. He picked it up. Read it. Read the handwritten note. Set it down with the particular care of a man holding something that could cut, a silence, the kind that has weight. "I'll go with you," he said. "Elliot, you don't. Not to prove anything. Not to perform, just." He paused, choosing the words the way he chose everything, carefully. "You shouldn't walk into that room alone, and I'd like to be the person next to you, if you'll let me." She looked at him across the kitchen table, across the scattered papers and the cold coffee and the 2 years of rebuilding that had brought her to this exact moment, and she understood the moment she had been circling for months. This man saw her. All of her, the mess and the brilliance and the stubborn refusal to stay down. And he wasn't threatened by any of it. He was moved by it. "Okay," she said quietly. He nodded once. Then, because he was Elliot, he said, "But first, there's somewhere I want to take you. Tomorrow, if you're free." She raised an eyebrow. He drove her to a middle school in Camden, New Jersey. Underfunded, understaffed, the kind of school that policy papers reference as a statistic and then move on from. But inside, in a brightly lit classroom that smelled like dry erase markers and teenage energy, 32 eighth graders were in the middle of a lesson built entirely on Noelle's curriculum. The teacher saw her walk in and stopped mid-sentence. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then louder to the class, "Guys, this is her. This is the woman who wrote our program." 32 13-year-olds turned to look at Noelle, and what happened next was something she would carry for the rest of her life. A girl in the second row, braids, oversized sweatshirt, the kind of quiet intensity that usually means a kid is carrying more than anyone knows, stood up and said, "Your chapter about naming what hurts changed how I talk to my mom. We actually talk now. Like, for real." The room was very still. Then another student. I used the conflict map with my little brother. He's 7. He drew on it in crayon, but it worked. Then another. Noelle's eyes burned, but she stayed standing. She stayed present. She owed them that. On the drive back, she was quiet for a long time. Philadelphia moved past the window in a blur of bridge cables and autumn light. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked. Elliot kept his eyes on the road. "Because in 3 weeks you're going to walk into a room with a man who spent 11 years making you feel invisible. And I wanted you to know, really know, in your body, not just in your head, that you are the opposite of invisible. You are the reason those kids have language for what they feel. That's not small, Noelle. That's enormous." She stared at the side of his face, the quiet certainty of it, the absolute absence of performance. "Thank you," she said. He glanced at her, just for a second, and in that second, something passed between them that neither of them pretended was professional anymore. She looked back at the window. Her pulse was doing something she hadn't felt in years. The morning of the wedding, Noelle woke at 5. She lay still in the dark, running an internal inventory. Fear? No. Anger? No. What she found was a kind of stillness she hadn't known she was capable of. The settled certainty of a woman who has already done the hardest thing, and survived it, and built something beautiful from the wreckage. She drew a bath. She took her time. The dress was deep emerald green. Floor-length silk that caught the light like water, fitted at the waist. A single shoulder strap that left the other bare. Simple, devastating. The kind of dress that doesn't need to announce itself because it doesn't need to. At her wrist, a thin gold bracelet that had belonged to her grandmother, the one piece of jewelry she had tucked into her suitcase the day she left, hidden inside a rolled pair of socks, because she had known, even then, that some things were worth protecting. She stood in front of the mirror. Not a woman performing revenge. Not a woman dressed for war. Just a woman who had come through something and was still here entirely herself, and that was more than enough. Chloe appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, you look like a mermaid." Noelle laughed. "That is the best compliment I have ever received." Marcus, hovering behind his sister with his hands in his pockets, the way 8-year-old boys do when they're feeling something too big to name, said simply, "You look really pretty, Mom." She kissed them both. Mrs. Delgado from next door arrived to babysit. Noelle knelt in front of her children, held their faces, looked them in the eyes. "I'll be back before bedtime. And when I come back, we're making pancakes." "Deal, deal," they said in unison. Elliot arrived at noon. Black suit, white shirt, open collar. He stood in the hallway and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Noelle, her name in his voice. Something about the way he said it, like he was holding it carefully, like it was breakable and precious. "You are extraordinary," he said. Not casually, not as flattery, as fact. She blinked hard. "If you make me cry before we get there, Elliot Crane, I will never forgive you." He smiled. "Shall we?" She lifted her chin. "Let's." The venue was a restored estate 40 minutes outside the city. Stone facade, French gardens, a long gravel drive lined with trees that had been there longer than anyone alive. 200 guests, every one of them selected to witness Grant Whitfield's ascension to the life he believed he deserved. Noelle and Elliot arrived 7 minutes after the ceremony was scheduled to begin, not fashionably late, deliberately late. Just enough to ensure the room was full, the attention was focused, and the entrance would be noticed. The double doors opened. Noelle walked in. The murmur started at the back of the room and rolled forward like weather, heads turning, whispers spreading, 200 people registering something they had not expected and could not stop looking at. She moved through it the way water moves through a canyon, unhurried, inevitable, shaped by nothing but its own direction. Elliot walked beside her with his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Not possessively, protectively. The gesture of a man who knew exactly where he wanted to be. Grant saw her from the altar. What happened to his face in the next 5 seconds would become the subject of quiet conversation among his colleagues for months. First, recognition. His eyes found her the way they always had, automatically, because 11 years of marriage wires certain reflexes into the nervous system. Then confusion, because the woman standing in his doorway bore almost no resemblance to the one he had left. He had preserved a very specific version of her in his memory, diminished, uncertain, made small by his leaving. That version was a comfort to him. It confirmed every justification he had built. That version was not here. In her place was a woman in emerald silk who moved through his wedding like she owned the room, without once appearing to try. Who looked younger than he remembered, lighter, as though the act of leaving him had unlocked something that had been held hostage for a decade. Then the whispers reached him. "Is that Elliot Crane? Bridgepoint Learning? He never comes to things like this. She wrote that book, set the table anyway. My sister gave it to me after my divorce. I cried for 3 hours. She looks absolutely incredible." Each word landed separately. Each one drew blood. Grant's jaw tightened, his hands folded in front of at the altar, pressed harder against each other. Something dark and liquid moved through his chest, a jealousy so acute it felt like illness. He had sent that invitation as a weapon. He had choreographed this moment in his imagination. Noelle, worn and faded, watching Meredith glide toward him in white, finally understanding that she had never been enough. Instead, she had walked into his cathedral and eclipsed every person in it without saying a word. And Elliot Crane, a man whose name appeared on buildings and foundation letterheads and the kind of lists Grant had spent his entire career trying to reach, was standing beside her with the quiet, unmistakable ease of a man who considered himself the lucky one. Grant looked at Meredith, waiting at the far end of the aisle. Then he looked back at Noelle, and he felt for the first time in his life the full weight of what he had thrown away. Not the pretty version, not the theoretical one, the real, specific, irreversible weight of it. A woman who had loved him honestly, raised his children patiently, and asked for nothing more than to be seen, and he had responded by making her invisible. Now she was the most visible person in the room. Meredith began her walk down the aisle. She was beautiful, objectively, expensively beautiful. But something had shifted in the atmosphere, and she felt it. Her smile flickered. Her eyes scanned the guests and landed on Noelle. Vows were exchanged. Rings were placed. The officiant pronounced them married. Applause. The ordinary architecture of a wedding. But underneath it, a current. Something unresolved. Something building. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more heartfelt stories. Thank you. Now, back to the story. The reception was held in the garden. String lights, an 8-piece band, champagne towers, and a 5-tier cake that cost more than Noelle's first 6 months of rent in her post-divorce apartment. Grant found her near the bar. She had known he would. "You look different," he said, holding his glass the way men hold things when they want to appear casual and are failing. "I am different," Noelle said. "Not confrontational, not cold, just true." "The book," he said. "I heard about the book. Did you read it?" A pause that answered the question. "You could have done all that while we were married," he said, and there it was, the reflex, the instinct, even now, to make her success about his permission. Noelle looked at him, really looked, at the man she had loved for over a decade, the father of her children, the person who had once been the center of her entire world. And she felt something she hadn't expected, not anger, not satisfaction, something closer to sadness, the quiet kind. The kind you feel for someone who will never understand what they lost, because understanding would require a self-awareness they've spent their whole life avoiding. "No, Grant," she said gently. "I couldn't have. That's the part you still don't understand." She turned and walked away. Not dramatically, not with a line delivered over her shoulder. She simply walked away because the conversation was over, and she had spent 11 years staying in conversations that were over. Elliot appeared at her side as though summoned by frequency. "You okay?" "I'm good," she said, and meant it entirely. The disruption came 90 minutes later. It began with 2 dark sedans pulling into the estate's gravel drive, then 4 people in business attire entering through the service entrance, then a quiet conversation with the event coordinator, whose face drained of color in approximately 4 seconds. The music stopped. The garden went silent the way gardens do when 200 people all hold their breath at the same moment. An officer in a dark suit approached the head table. He spoke quietly, but in the silence, every syllable carried. "Meredith Payne Whitfield?" Meredith looked up from her champagne. The smile was still on her face. It would be the last time it fit properly. "Mrs. Whitfield, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." The garden did not move. Meredith's real name, it would later emerge, was Meredith Collier Payne. 3 years before she met Grant, she had been a compliance officer at a hedge fund in Connecticut. Over 22 months, she had facilitated the movement of $6.3 million through a network of constructed that it took federal investigators 14 months to trace. By the time they did, she had already reinvented herself. New city, new firm, new target, Grant Whitfield, successful enough to be useful, ambitious enough to look the other way, vain enough to be managed. She had spent the better part of 2 years becoming exactly what he wanted, and in the process she had threaded his firm's accounts into her operation with the delicate precision of a surgeon. Clean on the surface, rotten underneath. Meredith stood from the head table, the wedding gown, Vera Wang, hand-baited cathedral train, moved with her like an ironic commentary on everything it was supposed to represent. She walked between 2 agents across the garden, past the champagne towers and the cake and the string lights, and the image was so surreal that several guests would later describe it as feeling like a scene from a film they couldn't quite place. She stopped once, turned, found Noelle in the crowd. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something flickered across Meredith's face that might have been recognition of what Meredith herself had pretended to be, and of the vast, uncrossable distance between the two. She turned back and kept walking. Then the second officer approached Grant. Mr. Whitfield. Grant's champagne glass was still in his hand. He had not moved since Meredith's name was called. He stood at the head table of his own wedding reception, like a man watching his house burn from the front lawn, too stunned for action, too aware for denial. Mr. Whitfield, you are being detained for questioning regarding the receipt of funds connected to an ongoing federal investigation into financial fraud. This is my wedding, Grant said. The words came out thin, stripped of the authority that had always been their scaffolding. Sir, we need you to come with us. He looked across the garden, past the flowers and the guests and the 5-tier cake, past the band members standing frozen with their instruments, past the children of friends holding sparklers that had gone out. He found Noelle. She held his gaze, steady, not triumphant, not cruel, not anything he had prepared himself for. She looked at him the way you look at a chapter you finished a long time ago, with the clarity of distance and the strange tenderness of knowing it brought you to where you are. Noelle, he said, just her name, as though there should have been an entire speech behind it, and he had arrived at the podium to find every page blank. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Some silences say more than language ever could. They led him away. The garden buzzed with the particular energy of 200 people trying to assemble the impossible into something that made sense. Whispers, wide eyes, champagne glasses set down untouched, a flower girl tugging at her mother's sleeve, asking why the music stopped, and then Elliot Crane stepped forward. Not to the center of the garden, not to the stage. He simply walked to where Noelle was standing and stood in front of her, and the murmuring quieted the way sound quiets around something that matters. He looked at her, only at her. The garden, the guests, the aftermath, all of it dissolved. I had something planned, he said. I've been carrying it for weeks, rewriting it in my head every night because the words kept being wrong. Noelle went still. They're still wrong, he said. But I think imperfect words said to the right person matter, more than perfect words said to no one. He reached into his jacket pocket. Noelle, I have loved watching you build something extraordinary from nothing. I have loved the way you refuse to be diminished. I love how you talk about your children, like they're the most important project you'll ever work on. And you're right, they are. I love how you argue with me about pedagogy. I love how you laugh, the real laugh, the one that surprises you. He held out a ring, simple, warm gold, a single stone that caught the garden light and held it. I know this is the strangest possible moment, he said, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. I know this was supposed to be someone else's wedding. I know there are federal agents in the parking lot. A ripple of stunned laughter from the guests. But I also know that I love you. Every version of you I've met. Every version I haven't yet. And I don't want to wait for a more convenient moment, because I've learned that the right moments aren't convenient. They're just right. Noelle looked at him. At this quiet, certain man who had walked into her life without fanfare, who had never once asked her to shrink, who saw her clearly and chose her deliberately. Her eyes were full. She let them be. She was done apologizing for the things that moved her. You already know my answer, she said. Yes, she said. Yes, Elliot, 1,000 times. The garden erupted. 200 strangers, most of whom had come to witness a very different union, burst into applause and cheers so loud that the birds in the estate's oak trees scattered. The officiant, who had been standing near the arbor in quiet bewilderment for the past 20 minutes, stepped forward with the cautious optimism of a man who has learned that life's script is rarely the one you rehearsed. It appears, he said, that there may still be a ceremony to perform this afternoon if the couple is willing. We don't have a license, Noelle said, slightly breathless. Elliot reached into his jacket again, produced a folded document, marriage license completed, signed by both a witness and a county clerk. She stared at him. Since Wednesday, he admitted. I wasn't entirely sure you'd say yes, but I was mostly sure. Mostly sure, she repeated, laughing. The laugh rose out of her unbidden, bright and startled and overflowing with something she could only call joy. The real kind, the kind you can't manufacture or rehearse. It filled the garden. He laughed with her, and then 200 people laughed with them, because some things are simply contagious, and joy, real, unscripted, hard-won joy, is the most contagious thing there is. When the laughter settled, Noelle straightened her dress, lifted her chin, looked at the officiant, then back at Elliot. "Let's get married," she said. The ceremony lasted 12 minutes. The vows were the ancient ones, worn smooth by centuries of use, but the truth inside them was brand new. Elliot spoke with steady, quiet conviction, his eyes never leaving hers. Noelle's voice trembled twice. She didn't apologize for it. She was no longer ashamed of her own tenderness. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the sound that rose from 200 people was something closer to a roar than applause. But Noelle barely heard it. She was looking at Elliot, who was looking at her, the way the shore looks at the tide, as though she was the thing he had been waiting for, and she would always come back. And that was enough. The kiss was gentle, unhurried. Not a finale, a beginning. The first sentence of something long and complex and worth every word. When they pulled apart, she held his face in her hands just for a moment, just to look at him properly. This man who had found her in the rubble of her old life and never once tried to rebuild her, who had simply stood beside her and watched her rebuild herself. "Thank you," she whispered. He turned his face and pressed his lips to her palm. Warm, certain, a promise made in the smallest possible gesture. "Thank you," he said. Two small words spoken twice, and in them, everything. Every night she had studied with burning eyes. Every essay she had written at 2 a.m, every time she had chosen to stand up instead of stay down, every prayer whispered into the dark, over her children's sleeping heads. All of it arriving, at last, exactly where it was supposed to. The story moved the way certain stories do. Quietly at first, then all at once. By the following morning, people were sharing it with a single message attached. "You need to hear this. The investigation into Meredith Collier Payne took 8 months. Grant was not charged with direct involvement, but the court found his negligence had enabled the fraud to continue unchecked through his firm's accounts. Willful blindness, the judge called it. He received a 14-month sentence. He served it. Whether he came out different is a question only time will answer. But those who saw him in the months after said he looked like a man who had finally stopped performing and wasn't sure who was left without the costume." Meredith served her sentence as well. Those who visited her near the end said she seemed quieter, more honest. Whether it was growth or exhaustion, perhaps only she would ever know. The honest table became something larger than Noelle had ever planned, and exactly what she had always been building toward. The curriculum reached schools in 27 countries. She wrote a second book. She traveled, she spoke. She sat across from parents in community centers and church basements and underfunded school libraries, and said the thing she had learned in the hardest possible way. "You are not too broken to begin again. You are not too late. The table is still yours to set." And she always came home. Home to Elliot, who had understood from the beginning that the best thing he could do was believe in her, who kept the kitchen warm when she traveled, who kissed her temple the moment she walked through the door every single time without fail. A quiet declaration he never tired of making. Home to Marcus, who let Elliot in not with words but with a moment. A Saturday afternoon, a half-finished science project, and a quiet, "You're actually pretty good at this." Elliot had smiled and said nothing. Some acceptances don't need to be celebrated. They just need to be received. Home to Chloe, who started calling him E-Dad within a month and never once questioned whether the name fit. Who, on the evenings when Elliot and Noelle slow danced in the kitchen, thinking no one was watching, would peek around the doorframe with her stuffed rabbit and giggle, until they pulled her in and danced with her between them. 14 months after the wedding, Noelle told Elliot she was pregnant on an ordinary Sunday morning. She was holding a mug of chamomile tea she couldn't bring herself to drink. He went very still. Then he crossed the kitchen without a word, took the mug gently from her hands, set it on the counter, and wrapped his arms around her completely, his face pressed against her hair. He stayed there. "We're going to need a bigger table," he said finally. She laughed against his chest. "We're going to need a bigger everything." He pulled back just far enough to look at her. "Really look." Then kissed her softly, completely, the kind of kiss that doesn't ask for anything, the kind that simply says, "I am so grateful it's you." Their daughter arrived in early spring. The nights got harder, the mornings got better on the difficult nights. The 3 a.m. ones, when Noelle sat on the bathroom floor with a baby on her shoulder and nothing left. Elliot would appear in the doorway. No words, just warmth. He would press a kiss to her forehead, take the baby, and nod toward the bed. Just that, just enough. That's the whole truth of a good life. It comes with the hard and the luminous, and you wouldn't trade either one. One evening, years later, Noelle stood at the window of a house that smelled like rosemary and homework and the particular chaos of a family that has chosen each other on purpose. Marcus, 14 now, explaining something to Chloe with the exaggerated authority of an older brother. Chloe rolling her eyes but listening anyway. Their youngest tumbling across the grass in pursuit of a soccer ball and a dog that had arrived one Christmas and never quite learned the concept fetch. Elliot came to stand behind her. He didn't say anything. He slipped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder, and they watched together. The unhurried, wordless way of two people who have learned that the best moments don't announce themselves. They just arrive, quietly, and the only thing required of you is to be present for them. She turned her face toward his. He kissed her cheek. Slow, deliberate, like the final note of a song he had been composing for years. She thought of the woman who had left with 2 suitcases and a crescent moon nightlight, who had cried on a kitchen floor and made herself a promise in the dark. I will not let this be the end of me. She found that woman now with enormous tenderness. You were never the problem, she thought. You were never too small. You were always the destination. You just hadn't arrived yet. Elliot's arms tightened around her, just slightly, just enough, as if, across all that silence, he had somehow heard. She smiled, covered the children, watched the light. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart sing.